Welcome back. Now, climate change is reshaping global agriculture, and for Africa, the stakes are even higher. And that leads us to discuss global effects of climate change on agriculture and Africa's preparedness. Joining us via Zoom this morning is Dr. Haruna Manu. He's an environmental specialist. You're welcome to the program. Good morning.
Good morning. Good morning, Signature TV. I hope you are doing well.
We're very well, thank you. Now, can you tell us about how climate change is affecting agriculture globally today? And, what are some of the effects that it has on our agriculture?
Thank you very much. My name is Haruna Manu Isa, as you rightly said. And the effect or the issue of climate change as it relates to agriculture vis-a-vis the position of Africa is very, very disturbing. It is disturbing to the extent that if nothing is done about it, by the year 2050, more than 50% of our agricultural production is going to reduce drastically, meaning we are going to lose about 50% of our agricultural production capacity. So how does climate change affect us as Africans or as a continent? We have to look at it from four perspectives. One, there is increase in temperature. Increase in temperature reduces yield because of heat stress and higher respiration. And rainfall variability and drought is another driver through which climate change impacts agriculture globally in Africa in particular. Another aspect is flooding and extreme rainfall. In Nigeria today, we are all living witnesses to the devastating effect of flooding across the country. And this is a replica of what is also happening across other African countries. The next is the aspect of pests, diseases, and weeds. Where you have vulnerable agriculture in the face of pests, increasing pest population or pest infestation in view of the climate variability and climate change, then Africa is nowhere close to being adaptable. The mitigation measures that we have as a country, as a continent, are not high enough to the extent of future-proofing the agricultural sector in Africa. And you see, I would like us to focus more on agriculture because that is the sector that will end up having a telling effect on us as a continent. Let's look at some statistics. Whenever a country depends so much on rain-fed agriculture, we classify that country to be highly vulnerable to the vagaries of climate change. And in Africa today, if you look at the statistics, only North Africa has about 45% irrigated agriculture, meaning 55% are rain-fed. And we have said this without number, that climate change affects rainfall variability, influence rainfall variability, leading to extreme heat, leading to flooding, and what have you. So when you have a country, North Africa, or a continent, a region in our continent, that is North Africa, depending only about 45%. This is, in fact, this is the highest. This is the most climate-proof region because in terms of agriculture, because 45% of them depend on irrigated agriculture, meaning they can cultivate their farmlands almost all year round. 45% of them cultivate their farmlands all year round. Look at another aspect, that is Central Africa, with only 8% that are depending on irrigated agriculture, meaning 92% are rain-fed. And we know the impact of climate change on rainfall. Now, let's look at our own West Africa. In West Africa, only 4% are depending on irrigated agriculture. And we know the impact of climate change on rainfall, meaning about 96% of our farmers depend on rain-fed agriculture. We don't need a soothsayer to tell us this is not a good omen for us. Where you have 96% of our farmers depending on rain-fed agriculture that is already exposed to the vagaries of climate change. Now, let's look at East Africa. East Africa is only 4%, meaning 97%, 96, 97% of their farmers depend on rain-fed agriculture. This data is available on FAO website. Anybody can go there and check. I will look at South Africa. South Africa, which is coming next to North Africa, is 12%, meaning 12% of South Africans or farmers in South Africa are dependent on irrigated agriculture. Meaning that is the percentage of farmers that are climate proven. They are climate proven against the vagaries of climate change. Meaning they have a kind of they have some resilience. They have developed resilience because if you depend on rain-fed agriculture, to that extent of your dependence, this will also translate to the extent of your exposure to vagaries of climate change. This is the statistics. And let's look at some countries in Africa for us to appreciate how vulnerable Africa is. I take agriculture because that is the bedrock upon which all countries survive. When you have a weak agricultural system, a weak crop and cropping system, you are invariably vulnerable to the vagaries of climate change, whether you know it or not. So let's look at Egypt. Egypt, 98% of Egyptian farmers are dependent on irrigated agriculture. So to that extent, we say only Egypt. To that extent, only Egypt is resilient, has developed that resilience in the agricultural sector, meaning they have cultivate their farmlands all year round, with only 2% dependent on rain-fed agriculture. If you look at South Africa, only 10% coming next to Egypt, only 10%. Let's look at Nigeria, where we are. In Nigeria, surprisingly, and although not surprisingly, investment in the irrigation sector has been very, very low, except with the recent improvement in the just concluded Tribune project. Our irrigation system has been abandoned for so many years. So that will have a chilling effect on us, especially as we are not we are vulnerable to the vagaries of climate change. Only 3% of our farmers cultivate their farmlands all year round, meaning about 97% of our farmers or 99% of our farmers depend on rain-fed agriculture. My dear viewers, you can see the extent of how vulnerable we are with the vagaries and changes and vulnerability that are abound with the advent of climate change. And about 97% or 99% of our farmers depend on rain-fed agriculture. Then we don't need to go far to determine our vulnerability. We don't need to go far. We don't need any scientific evidence to know that our people and we as a country, because our food system is dangerously vulnerable. Dangerously vulnerable. Because 97% of farmers depend on this. And me and you depend on the food they produce. Kenya, 3%, meaning about 97% of them are dependent on rain-fed agriculture. Look at Ethiopia. About 97% of them are dependent on rain-fed agriculture. These statistics are according to FAO. Ghana, 3%, only 3% are dependent on irrigated agriculture. Look at Uganda, only 2%. Mali, only 6% are dependent on irrigated agriculture. So I'm giving you these statistics for you so that we can appreciate our exposure level. And the statistics is even more gloomy if you look at the livelihood capital. If you look at the social capital of Africa vis-a-vis the exposure of the continent to climate change. If you look at the human capital, the natural capital are also something that we need to worry about.
Why does it seem like agriculture seems to suffer more than other sectors in Africa?
The answer is very simple. Low investment. Low investment and policy somersault, policy instability. So whenever you have low investment agriculture, you are bound to have these kind of statistics looking at us every year in and out.
Now, just like you mentioned that most African countries are reliant on rain-fed agriculture. What makes Africa's agriculture more vulnerable to this climate change issue compared with other regions? Would you say it's simply the weather, or would you say it is economic or institutional conditions too? And also, why are most African countries so dependent on rain-fed agriculture instead of this irrigation method that you spoke of?
Yes, as I mentioned earlier, is low investment and policy direction of government. Before now, whenever you have majority of our people are primary producers with little value addition, we produce raw material, we'll export these raw materials to other continents, and they manufacture these things, refine them, bring this back to us. They take our cotton from here, they take our palm oil, they take it outside, refine it, and bring it back to us. It means if there have been adequate investment in our agricultural sector, this story wouldn't have been this gloomy. So largely, personally, and what I have read over time, low investment in agriculture. And then sometimes the advent of other means of dependence, like oil, is a blessing as well as a curse. It's a blessing to us, but it's a curse because we have abandoned our agricultural sector, which is supposed to be the bedrock of our economy. We have abandoned it. Now we are busy chasing free money in the oil sector, abandoning the bedrock of our economy. You see the focus of government because the government gets more revenue from there. So they abandon agriculture. And this is typical not only of Nigeria, across the continent. But look at Egypt. Because there have been heavy investment in agriculture, they have about 98% of their farmers dependent on irrigation agriculture. So it all depends on how committed and how focused, how determined policy direction is.
All right. Since you're talking about policy and the preparedness of Africa, now how effective are Africa's current policy on climate smart agriculture and food security? And are there any successful models that, pilot programs in Africa that demonstrate strong climate preparedness?
Yeah, there are some pockets of improvement here and there. There are some pockets of improvement, but we can only say that this pocket of improvement are basically not enough. Let me give you an example. For us to exit these gloomy statistics, we need to work on our agricultural sector seriously. In Nigeria, between 2018 to 2024, 2023, 2024, there was a heavy investment in agriculture by a project that is streaming project that rehabilitated public irrigation system across some states in this country. That project has improved the irrigation sector in Nigeria tremendously. But is that enough? Is that enough? Comparing the population, Africa is a continent that has been experiencing geometric population progression. But our food production is not meeting up with this geometric increase in population. Okay, so we need to do a lot more than what we have done. In fact, we need to do more than what we have done. We have to be very, very ambitious in the agricultural sector. So there have been pockets like what the shiny example given by Egypt, where 98% of their farmers depend on irrigated agriculture. It's a shiny example. Look at Nigeria. We have this water bodies that are lying fallow. We need to invest heavily in this sector so that we can cultivate our farms all year round. Until we achieve this feat, we cannot say to be climate proven. We cannot say to have climate proof ourselves against the boundaries of climate change. So there are pockets of improvement. Typical example is what Nigeria has done. And there are other examples in Kenya where they invest heavily in agriculture to change this narrative. But is that enough, considering our geometric population increase? Nigeria has a population of more than 250 million. And going by projection, by 2050, we'll be over 300 million. So the issue has gone beyond just rhetorics. We have to go beyond rhetorics and then get down to policy direction, heavy investment, and government focus on our agricultural sector.
Now, from what you've said, I mean, we are quite a populous country, and if these systems are not put in place in our agricultural sector, it's going to affect crops and yields, and also it's also going to affect the food and what people eat. So if these crop yields begin to decline because of lack of preparedness, looking at the climate change situation, what would you say would be the ripple effect to Africans as a whole, both those in rural households, communities, and even our economy as an African nation?
It simply means one thing: there will be geometric increase in poverty. Once you cannot stabilize your food system, even as a person, once you cannot stabilize your food system, it basically means that you are at the risk, or you are exposed to the vagaries of poverty, malnourishment. Okay? Poverty will be the order of the day because you cannot provide food to the teeming population. So once you cannot provide food to the teeming population, then the human capital index of that particular country will be drastically affected. And once the human capital index is affected, it automatically means that productivity will be lowered. There will be low productivity, and it will have a ripple effect across all the systems. Our health sector will not be enough for all of us because everybody will be going to hospital due to one element or the other. So the backbone of every development, any development, check the global statistics. You realize that even those countries that are called advanced countries, they depend heavily on agriculture. So until we turn around our agricultural system, we are bound to face a very gloomy feature that nobody can tell you for sure whether we are going to exit that scenario without we putting our act together. So the issue is we need to, if we don't address these issues, by 2050, when we double our population, then your guess is as good as mine.
All right. Now, Nigeria signed the Paris Agreement and developed a national climate change policy. Now, how do we go beyond signing agreements to, proper implementation for Africa, not just Nigeria?
Yeah, well, the Paris Agreement and the other climate change policy being enacted by various countries, and there are also policies, frameworks to address issues of climate change. As you rightly pointed out, we need to go beyond signing agreement or enacting policies, signing or promulgating policy. We need to go beyond that. These policies need to be cascaded to the last person in our rural areas. People in the rural area are more vulnerable. And about 70% of our farmers, of our people, are rural based. Irrespective of the rapid urbanization, we still have large population of our people in the rural area. So if you sign your climate change agreement or your climate change policy or anything, then, and it's not cascaded, it's not backed with financial commitment, it's not backed with investment, then it will remain a paper tiger. It will forever remain a paper tiger without investment. You have to invest in that sector. You have to invest in climate education. You have to invest in climate smart agriculture. Extension officers need to be educated on the vagaries of climate change and how to educate farmers on how to mitigate or adapt to the changing climate. So it's not enough for us to be signing agreement, to promulgate, to be enacting policies. It is not always enough. We have to go beyond that and then make sure the real impact of these policies are being felt to the last person in our rural areas, because that is where 70% of our people are domiciled.
Well, okay, Dr. Haruna Manu Isa, want to say a very big thank you to you for joining us on Signature Morning today. Thank you for joining.
Thank you so much, Signature TV. Thank you for having me on board. Have a good morning.
Have a good morning.
Right. We just spoke to an environmental specialist on the global effect of climate change on agriculture and Africa's preparedness. Now we'll go on a short break. When we return, Signature Morning continues.
Every second, every minute, every day, news is breaking, events occur, and there are new developments. At Signature TV, we follow these stories objectively, bringing all sides without bias, explaining the complex issues, breaking down the numbers, and investigating the issues behind the news. Anywhere and everywhere, near or far, wherever the news is, we will be there. Signature TV. News in your pocket.